Is poverty the new minimalism? Now, there's something when I hear a question like this, it comes across to me as accusatory, and that says something about me and what's going on inside of me.
Yeah.
I don't know. Help me work through that real quick. Like, is this someone on Patreon?
No, this is from Twitter. I just sent out a tweet.
Yeah. Okay.
From my personal Twitter account.
So that's makes sense that it's not from someone on Patreon. That someone from Twitter would that makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, so my suspicion is true.
Yeah, but Twitter's not all bad.
But
These are all questions from Twitter.
No, it's not all bad. It's just a matter of someone who's paying to hear this right now.
Uh-huh.
They don't seem like they would ask a question like that because they understand. They already know the answer to that question.
Right.
This is, again, to me, it comes across as an accusatory question.
Well, let's talk about it. So someone's asking this question because they're confused. And so here's the biggest thing I've learned from TK when he's on our podcast. I think he's been on our podcast 6 times now. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we've been friends. He and I have long conversations outside of the podcast as well. And the thing that I learned most from him is giving a charitable view even to someone who with David literally lashing out at me and saying some pretty insulting things.
I forget what question it was that you took that. You were like, TK, help me have a charitable view. Like that. I loved how you approached that, man. It inspired me to like start approaching things like that more.
But I see him do that every day, and his every day when we have a conversation, he will try to take the other side just to steel man his own argument. The opposite of a straw man argument is a steel man argument. Right. Build your own up by looking at the best possible argument against your side. And so if I'm going to steel man my own argument, let me talk about poverty here. This person is confused. They are conflating a few things here. They're conflating having nothing or next to nothing or deprivation with minimalism. That's easy to do. And let me explain why it's easy to do. Often minimalism is propagated especially in the media, as owning nothing.
Right.
You look at someone like Marie Kondo. I sent you a funny meme recently. She's like holding a gun and it says, "You no longer spark joy. Goodbye."
Does she ever even use the word minimalism? I don't think she does.
I don't, but I don't know. There's also translation errors, right? So she doesn't speak English.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure she speaks more English words than I speak Japanese words, but she's not fluent in English. And so we have these translation errors as well. When she talks about sparking joy, whoever translated that really meant sparking happiness, right?
Right.
Joy comes only from our interaction with others. And it's my favorite part in the new book is where I really go through and dissect the well-being continuum.
Yeah.
And we talk about tranquility and equanimity. And we talk about pleasure and happiness and contentment and joy and the difference between those things. And I think that when we think of minimalism at its extreme, it appears that it's owning nothing. And so it's easy to confuse, well, if you own nothing, then that's the same thing as a poor person, right? It's absolutely wrong, by the way. You and I grew up really poor. We owned way more stuff when we were really poor than we did now.
Oh, yeah.
Because we weren't intentional.
Right.
Now, we were really, really poor. I mean, about as poor as you can get in America, we were.
And the thing about being poor, too, is when something is offered for free, you take it. Because
you don't have to, but you often do.
Yeah, yes. Because it's like, oh, well, I don't have the money to buy that certain thing, and I may not need that thing,
right? But
I might need it in the future. So there's this sense of scarcity, and if something is offered to you for free, like we would jump on it. I mean, dude, every single piece of furniture that my mother had growing up, it was out of the trash. Every single piece. Yeah,
someone puts it on the curb and you go get it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we did very similar things, or Goodwill at best, or thrift shop, whatever. And so I could see why you would conflate that, and I'm sorry that you conflated it that way. And so let me do a better job of explaining that minimalism is about the intentional use of our resources. It starts with the stuff, but then it goes so far beyond the stuff. It's about being intentional with the people we bring into our lives and the people we keep in our life. And we'll dive more into that in a moment. It's about being intentional with our creativity and how we spend our time. We spend our time. It's so funny, Ryan. If we were to, we often will get very concerned about, I couldn't possibly, the patrons know how much their time is worth.
Yeah.
Because you're spending $2 on this conversation, or $5 if you're one of the true fans, right? Or $8 if you're one of the VIPs. And thank you no matter what level you're at there.
Amen.
But the thing that you understand is that your time is worth it. We don't fill our podcast with ads. And you're buying a ad-free version of the podcast, and not only are you doing that, you're supplying the people who can't afford the $2 an ad-free version as well.
Yeah.
So you're actually providing a community service to the hundreds of thousands of people who listen to our podcast, 1 to 3 million downloads a month. You're supplying, you're the 1% of people who are supplying a community service to the other 99%, and you're actually giving them some of their time back.
Yeah.
You're being ultra considerate. And isn't that what we're talking about, minimalism? Being considerate with the resources you have, including your time, your money, your community. And if you're being intentional, it doesn't mean, by the way, you don't have to have a certain amount of money to be intentional with all of your resources. Money is one resource. By the way, wouldn't it make more sense if you have very little money? I left the corporate world, Ryan, 2011.
Yep.
I made $23,000 that year. The year before that, I made about just almost $200,000.
Right.
I was still broke. I spent more than $200,000.
Oh yeah, you didn't. It's not like you walked away and had $100,000 sitting in.
No, I had $16,000 when I walked away.
Yeah.
And
that was because
yeah, I got a severance package.
Right.
Yeah, I negotiated a severance package.
And then, oh, by the way, you had a huge unexpected tax bill you had to pay.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I had enough money for about, when it was all said and done, about 4 months of paying rent and my bills. And so I had some time to figure it all out, right? And that was great, but it wasn't nearly what if I would have been responsible with those resources, that decade, I would have had years worth of I would have had years worth of a safety net. And by the way, if the first 20 years of my life when I was also broke, wouldn't I have benefited? Wouldn't my mom benefited? Our family benefited from being more intentional with the little bit of money that we had? Wouldn't we have benefited from being more intentional with using our time, using our time deliberately? Wouldn't we have benefited from being more creative and using our time to create rather than consume? Wouldn't we have benefited from surrounding ourselves with people who shared our values, not just our proximity?
Yeah.
If we were more intentional with the people in our life, wouldn't we have benefited from that? There was one area my mom was very intentional in her life with, and it was with community. She did a phenomenal job, and I write about this in Love People Use Things. She, every year, this is just one example, but she would organize this annual Thanksgiving dinner. And sometimes she would feed people who weren't even as poor as us. But in the way she organized, she got grocery stores to donate turkeys, and this grocery store to donate potato salad, and this seamstress to donate napkins and cutlery or whatever, and like the whole community would come together. And we had it in the basement of this church on Warren Street, and every year we would have this 200, 300 people show up to this thing. Some people had more money than us. Some people were homeless or near homeless, and she would feed people for Thanksgiving. And she did that all the time with these community things. And so people knew her in the community. Even though we didn't have any money, she was very intentional with that resource.